Well, hello and welcome to your Newsmax Daily for the final day of the year, Tuesday, December the 31st, 2024. This day, every single year, kind of blows my mind, right? Because you'll never say that year again. You'll never write it in your journal or whatever. It's just kind of weird, right? It's also National Champagne Day, appropriately so, as more champagne is purchased and consumed on this day than any other day. New Year's Eve across the globe, and depending upon when you're listening to me, it may very well already be 2025 somewhere. And think about this. The first 3 days of the new year will be Wednesday, January the 1st, tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, as in WTF. Just saying. Quick programming note, too. Newsmax will have special New Year's Eve programming tonight, hosted by Katrina Zish and Sean Kreisman, along with a bunch of guests and fun, beginning at 9 o'clock Eastern. They won't be drinking champagne in Times Square with Anderson Cooper, I'm pretty sure, but it's going to be fun and newsworthy. Tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern on Newsmax, New Year's Eve. Memorial services for President Jimmy Carter going to take place now over the next several days in Georgia and in Washington, D.C. A motorcade will take Carter through his hometown of Plains, Georgia, to Atlanta, with stops at the state capitol and the Carter Presidential Center. He will lie there in repose until being flown to Washington on January 9th. That's next Thursday. His body in Washington will lie in state in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. A service will be held at the Washington National Cathedral on the same day, January 9th. Everybody who's somebody and many who aren't anybody will be there that day. President Biden will deliver the eulogy at the service. Biden said Carter asked him personally last year to deliver his eulogy. Then Carter will be buried in a private ceremony back home in Plains, Georgia, where he died on Sunday at 100. For more on Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, and let's all say the quiet part out loud, right? Two of the worst presidents in history. Here is Rob Finnerty.
I promise you that when Joe Biden does go, when Joe Biden passes away, hopefully many moons from now, I won't lie to you about his presidency. I'm not going to lie to you about what the last 4 years have really been like. And this notion that time heals all wounds is just wrong. Time does not heal all wounds. And when Joe does go, I'm sure you'll hear platitudes about his time as vice president, his time in the Senate. But Joe Biden will ultimately be judged for what he did when he had the biggest job in the land, and that was president of the United States. And that job, no matter what you read in the New York Times or the Washington Post over the next 3 weeks, at that one job, Joe Biden has been a complete failure. And Jimmy Carter, our 39th president, and the man to whom Joe Biden is compared the most, lived long enough to witness a president that was worse than him, although not by much. Jimmy Carter was by all measures a good man, but Jimmy Carter was a bad president. A good man, but a bad president. But for the last day, every time I hear someone in the media talking about him, they're leaving out the most important part of his life, the 4 years that he was actually president. Yes, Jimmy Carter built homes for Habitat for Humanity. That's wonderful, truly. Yes, he was married to the same woman for 77 years. And yes, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Jimmy Carter was a good man, but he was not a good president. And just like Joe Biden, history will judge him for that more than anything else. Because there are a lot of good people out there, and they don't get any attention at all when they die. But Jimmy Carter was president, so it's different. The other part of this story, Jimmy Carter had a long time to shape his legacy. He lived to be 100 years old. His post-presidency was longer than any other president in U.S. history. Jimmy Carter had 43 years to make up for the 4 years that he was in the White House. To put that into perspective, John F. Kennedy was 43 when he was elected president, and Carter was already in the Georgia State Senate at that time. 43 years is a very long time for people to change the way they feel about someone. But for an entire generation of Americans like my parents, their worldview was shaped by a man that didn't understand them at all. And just like Joe Biden, on Election Day in 1980, when Reagan beat Carter, mortgage rates were at almost 15% on a 30-year mortgage. And I'm sure that people watching at home right now remember that. They remember those days. My parents bought their first home when Jimmy Carter was president, and they always tell me how high the mortgage rate was. Yes, Jimmy Carter had a remarkable post-presidency, but generally speaking, if you're only hearing about the before and the after, the in the middle probably wasn't that great, and that's Jimmy Carter. How about John Quincy Adams? He also had a remarkable post-presidency. He's the only president in history to leave the White House and then run for Congress, where he fought against slavery for 17 years. He died in the U.S. Capitol building of a hemorrhage. And like Carter, he probably got a lot more done as a congressman in his post-presidency than as president. And just like Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden, a charismatic, populist candidate would beat him 4 years later. With John Adams, it was Andrew Jackson. Trump hung his portrait in the Oval Office. With Carter, it was Ronald Reagan. And with Biden, well, we all know what happened last month. It, of course, was Donald Trump. In 1976, and not surprisingly, then Senator Joe Biden was the first U.S. senator to endorse Jimmy Carter for president. And when Biden got the news that Carter passed away, Biden, as always, chose to mark the occasion from St. Croix by talking about his own loss, not once, but twice.
Our son Bo died. When he died, Jimmy and Rosa were there to help us heal. Jimmy knew the ravage of the disease too well, but he was also he and Rosa were very kind to Jill and me when we lost our son Bo. They were there for us.
That guy's still president for at least another 3 weeks. It turns out that Carter and Biden have a whole lot in common. Jimmy Carter left office with a 34% approval rating, the same approval rating that Joe Biden has today. Average inflation under Carter was 9.9%. Average inflation under Joe Biden was the highest of any president since, you guessed it, Jimmy Carter. Again, a good man, but a bad president.
Rob Finnerty is the host of Finnerty, 8 p.m. Eastern on Newsmax. Rob went on to play some more cuts of Biden's speech on Carter from St. Croix yesterday, where he and the First Lady have been vacationing. The Bidens are heading back to Wilmington, Delaware today, going home for the new year. And let's go back to Rob.
Donald Trump posted yesterday that Carter was a truly good man, and of course, he will be greatly missed. He was also very consequential, far more than most presidents after he left office. Warmest condolences to his wonderful family. Kind words from Donald Trump, considering that Jimmy Carter said this about Donald Trump not that long ago.
There's no doubt that the Russians did interfere in the election, and I think the interference, although not yet quantified, if fully investigated, would show that Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office because the Russians interfered on his behalf.
Carter said that while Donald Trump was still president. And as I was putting this together today with my team, I wanted you to have an honest look at someone that, just like all of us, was flawed. I didn't want you to have the CNN or MSNBC version that I've witnessed over the last day. All day, they've covered this story like George Washington died. Literally, that's what it's been like. Again, Jimmy Carter, good man, awful president. And when he lost in 1980, a Democrat wouldn't win the White House for another 12 years. And if Ross Perot didn't come along, George H.W. Bush probably would have won again in 1992. In fact, Jimmy Carter's 4 years in office was the only 4-year period for a Democrat in the White House in a 25-year period. Nixon, Ford, Jimmy Carter, Reagan twice, then George H.W. Bush. And just like Joe Biden, when he ran for re-election, a Kennedy, a Democrat from his own party, this time Ted Kennedy, would run against him. Jimmy Carter was the first president ever born in a hospital and the last of the Second World War presidents. He was also the first president to serve grits in the White House. My wife went to school in Georgia. I always thought that was interesting. Carter gave 3 inaugural addresses during the 70s, 2 in Georgia and then, of course, 1 in Washington. Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education. Donald Trump wants to shut it down. After 75 years under U.S. control, Jimmy Carter gave the Panama Canal back to Panama for nothing. Donald Trump wants it back.
Fantastic work by Rob and the whole Finnerty team. Jimmy Carter was also responsible for the largest energy crisis the country has ever seen, or at least in my lifetime. If you were alive then, you certainly remember it. Donald Trump made the country energy independent for the first time ever. President Biden has declared January 9th, the day of Carter's funeral, a national day of mourning, ordering U.S. flags to be flown at half-staff for 30 days at all federal buildings, at all military posts. The New York Stock Exchange announced yesterday that the stock markets will be closed on that day to honor the life and legacy of President Carter. And now the real news. The Biden administration announced nearly $6 billion in additional military and budget assistance for Ukraine. $6 billion. And nobody is saying anything. I told you yesterday, President Biden announced $2.5 billion early yesterday morning while the media was all caught up in Jimmy Carter's death. Then Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the U.S. has made available another $3.4 billion for a grand total of $5.9 billion. $5.9 additional billion. Did you hear anyone anywhere other than my quick mention talk about that yesterday? And this is really the kicker. $1.25 billion of that money is in military aid that will be drawn from the already low U.S. stockpiles. What are we doing? And what about the China hack? What China hack, Tony? The U.S. Department of Treasury confirming Monday that Chinese hackers were able to, quote, access certain unclassified documents during a December 8th attack, basically on the government. And now there's a joint investigation by the Department of Treasury and the FBI. Newsmax host David Harris Jr. discussed it with Gordon Chang, author of multiple books on China, and Steve Yates, senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation.
What is your take on this hack? Now, the Biden administration, which swore that Joe Biden wouldn't pardon his son Hunter, they're telling us that all the material that China gained access to was unclassified. Do you believe them?
No, I don't. And the other thing is that a hack of the U.S. Treasury sends shudders not just through the U.S., but around the world because of the dollar, because of the U.S. financial markets. You know, we have known that the Chinese have been hacking our networks since the 1990s or maybe even before. And we have the means to stop this, but we don't. So this is an issue of American political will. We need better defenses on our networks, but we also need a political establishment willing to impose those costs on China for this unacceptable behavior. And I hope that come January 20, President Trump imposes those costs to get the Chinese to stop this, because it's getting very, very dangerous.
Well, and it seems very dangerous. Steve, what are your thoughts? I mean, you're hearing that the U.S. Treasury was hacked by China. I think Gordon's absolutely right. It should send shivers up every single American's spine. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree very much with Gordon. And unfortunately, this is one of those things that just keeps happening. During the Obama administration, the Office of Personnel Management was hacked, and millions of American federal employees' information was compromised. That China has been relentless in sending all kinds of intrusive things into our country, from crazy balloons to drone swarms and who knows whatever else. If the U.S. Treasury is not secure, how confident can Americans be that their major infrastructure and other systems are secure? So the Trump administration is going to have an absolute mandate to take a very different approach to cybersecurity. And thankfully, the president has recruited an unusually informed and skilled team that really should know this stuff backwards and forwards. But America is late to this game. And China should be the one that's afraid that their systems are being compromised. We don't hear too many stories about them worrying about their infrastructure and their departments and ministries. Maybe it's about time the U.S. and our allies found ways to put them on the defensive.
Well, if there's one thing I think President Trump is good at doing, is doing exactly that, putting others on the offensive. I think that you're 100% correct. He's assembled quite the team when it comes to cyber tech anything. When you got Elon on your side, I think that he can figure out some ways to make sure he's going to hold China accountable and probably scare the crap out of them, too.
That's Newsmax host David Harris Jr. with Steve Yates of the Heritage Foundation and Gordon Chang. They also talked about the photos of then Vice President Biden and his son Hunter in China, the ones that surfaced over the weekend, which I also mentioned on yesterday's Newsmax Daily.
Let's talk about these newly released 2013 photos from the National Archives obtained by America First Legal, appearing to show Joe Biden introducing Hunter to Xi on an official government trip in Beijing, and then apparently taking the time to meet Hunter's new business partners. What do you make of this? Gordon, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, certainly Joe Biden has lied to the American people about never having any contact with Hunter about his business dealings with China. And so here, this is an issue of accountability. I guess they believe that because Biden is on his way out, that nothing will happen. But we got to remember that Hunter Biden now has a full pardon. That means he can't claim the protections of the Fifth Amendment if there is a federal grand jury. And I do hope that Kash Patel, when he heads the FBI, the first thing that he does is start issuing subpoenas to Hunter, because we need to learn a lot about money. This money leaves a trail. We should be able to find it out. The FBI is great at this stuff. I think that they should start acting vigorously and start to find out where all this money went.
Again, that is attorney Gordon Chang, author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, as well as other books on Newsmax last night. And let's finish up where you likely started the day or start your day on Wake Up America, who spoke with President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan.
Tom, you are such a busy man. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to be with us. We appreciate it. But man, this H-1B visa system, it is a hot topic. We know that it's broken. It needs some major reforms. So what's your plan to help make it better in this next administration?
Well, look, as far as H-1B discussion, I'm not going to get ahead of the president on this. I mean, he's going to have that. He'll make that decision. I'm busy trying to secure the border and running a deportation operation. I'll leave that up to the president to decide what he's going to do. I can tell you during the first administration, his immigration plan was based on merit mostly, right? People that come to the United States, get a visa and so forth, that can improve and help the United States become even greater. You still had room for families, moms, dads, sons, and daughters. There's still a family component, but it was based on merit the first time. I have not seen the second plan. I have not had a discussion about H-1B, so I'll leave it with the president to make those decisions.
Yeah, no, Tom, it seems to make sense. If you come here in America, you study at some of our most prestigious elite universities, why don't you take that knowledge and keep it here in America rather than going to India or maybe even an adversary like China? But to your other point, you've been busy laying out plans to combat the immigration crisis once the president takes office, potentially bringing back family detention centers to help with those deportation efforts. Obviously, that causes the left to lose their minds, but
well, Mark, I wrote an op-ed. I'm not done yet, but that's exactly what I wrote about this weekend, right? So I mentioned like maybe family detention may be an option, and everybody goes nuts. Let's remember, President Obama built family detention, right? So it was fine then. But if the Trump administration does it, all of a sudden we're cruel. But the reason I even think about family detention, again, no decision has been made, but I consider it an option. Let me tell you why. Because if we can detain the family in a residential center, not a jail, residential center, guess what? That gives us time to maybe do DNA testing. That gives us time to do an investigation and find out they're actually a family. Because under the Biden administration, we got thousands of children been trafficked into the United States with an adult that claims to be the parent but wasn't a parent. The Biden administration stopped DNA testing. They stopped family residential centers, and what came out of it? Thousands of kids trafficked into the United States that they can't find. That the Trump administration has made a promise, we're going to try to find these over 300,000 children. But the whole thought of a family residential center was to protect children, for God's sakes. But again, Obama does it, it's okay. Homan does it, I'm cruel. But it's an option we're considering for the safety and security of children across the world who come to this country.
That's border czar Tom Homan, who I'm going to start calling Tom Gives No You-Know-What's Homan on Wake Up America. We now have 20 days until Donald Trump takes office as the 47th president, and Tom Homan officially becomes border czar. And by January 21st, it'll be on. It's going to be very, very interesting, to say the least. As the talk of President Carter's life continues today and the memorials begin, there are some other U.S. political figures who died this year as well. Notable figures including Senator Joe Lieberman, a very influential senator, Senators Jim Inhofe, Jim Sasser, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, political pundit, radio and TV host Lou Dobbs, former talk show hosts Phil Donahue and Bob Newhart, comedian and actor Richard Lewis, the great Carl Weathers, It was a rough year. James Earl Jones, Chris Christopherson, Donald Sutherland, Cheetah Rivera, and many others. O.J. Simpson, Pete Rose, Willie Mays, and hockey star Johnny Gaudreau, who was killed in an accident with his brother. Maybe one of the worst stories of the year. Musicians Toby Keith, love me some Toby Keith, Dickie Betts, to name a few, and the legendary Quincy Jones. On the flip side of all those passings, the world's population increased by more than 71 million people in 2024. And we will now have more than 8 billion people on the globe on New Year's Day. That is according to the Census Bureau estimates. On Wall Street, the final trading session of the new year started off mixed, with the S&P and the Dow a bit higher. The Nasdaq was a bit lower after yesterday's declining session. Perhaps we can close out what has been a great year on the markets on a high note. And be sure to keep up with all of the news and breaking developments throughout the day on Newsmax, N2, and Newsmax.com. Don't forget about the special New Year's Eve programming tonight, 9 o'clock Eastern. I'm Tony Marino. This is the Newsmax Daily. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be careful tonight. Do not drink and drive. Happy New Year. I'll see you next year, and keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the Newsmax app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.